we were kind of force-fed a formula of rules and morality and law and scorecards and good grades, spiritually, so to speak. It was like there was the good boys and there was the bad boys, and there was the good girls and there was the bad girls. And what you came to realize over time is everyone was a bad guy and everyone was a bad girl.
It was very much an us versus literally everyone else, not just us versus non-Christians. It was us versus anyone else who wasn't in our walled garden.
Everything looked glossy and shiny and happy and pristine, and yet there was this raging, demonic, almost force behind the scenes. The church is a very selfish place, an extremely selfish place, and we want it our way. And then the news breaks. It doesn't just break for us, it breaks in the papers. Like, it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And I was irate. People were like, man, you're such an inspiration. And I'm like, I'm kind of just a con artist. Like, my faith isn't like super strong.
I think the truth is that everyone is drenched in scandal. Everything is drenched in scandal. We just don't see it all. Well, season 2 of The Christian Skeptic. This is the first time we've recorded like in the evening.
This is Christian Skeptic After Dark.
I know.
Right here, so.
That's why we're starting with your story, so we'll get all the juicy, unfiltered details that would not fare well in the light of day.
They don't fare well in light or dark.
Or anytime.
nor at any time or season.
Yeah, so I thought like starting off this season, we'll get back to the topics and the issues and things like we did in season 1, but just starting off the first couple episodes here, we got into our stories a little bit with the deconstruction episode, but I think we picked up some new listeners since then. And I don't know how many people actually know the whole story, because we've known each other since we were like 11 or 12, and just kind of how the progression of events, and also maybe more than that, is like the theological shifts that have gone on in the last few years. There's definitely been mistakes, and I think we're pretty open about things in our church, Redemption, and there's not a lot of trying to hide and pretend like everything is okay and that we're all good. And so I thought just let's start off with these stories and kind of lay it all out there, man. So we're starting with you. You're the storyteller tonight.
At 5:32 a.m. on Wednesday, February 6, 1980.
The world was forever changed.
The world was forever altered for the worse. It's when somebody starts to tell their story, almost like in a memoir fashion, I feel like it's very easy to play the victim. Like, woe is me, look at all the bad stuff that happened to me. And the reality is that bad stuff happens to all of us. And so the last thing I want to play is that card as I go along, no matter what I encountered, upbringing, misfortunes along the way, delayed diagnosis that would have helped much in my life, all kinds of stuff. But so with that said, stuff happened to me, but I'm not a victim. Like, I'm not going to play the victim. Like, so much of life is how, even though it's a bit cliche to say, but it's the truth. Like, so much of life is how we react to things. And I didn't react well to a lot of stuff. But I was raised in Christianity. I was raised in what I would call a sect of Christianity that was the Christian. Love my parents. My parents are great. Your parents are great. But it was definitely like the fundamental Christian right of the world. And that was even before we entered the Gothard movement, which I'll get to in a second. I mean, we were, my dad was kind of born again, became a Christian in the mid-70s out of the hippie revolution, the hippie movement, Beatlemania, a lot of sexual promiscuity, a lot of drug use, a lot of freedom in how like we view the world, kind of raised the hands against the man, so to speak. And so my dad was saved into the Christian counterculture of that. And I think it's true. I think this is why we can show some grace, hopefully, toward our parents, no matter who we are, as far as their ideological viewpoints, because they're just responding like we are. Like, I have to understand, I'm responding to my upbringing. They were responding to the movements they came out of and the upbringing they came out of. So my dad comes out of a non-Christian background. My mom comes out of a non-Christian background. They meet at Bible college. And and right away they enter into the independent fundamental Baptist world, which we've talked about a little bit, but it's a very uptight, very strict, extremely traditional, suits and ties. This sounds ridiculous, or it sounds like I'm making something up, but it's the truth. Very short hair on men, like can't touch the collar, can't touch the ear, no beards, no mustaches. Women skirts to their ankles. Head coverings sometimes. Anyway, extremely the ultra conservative branch of evangelicalism. No, of course, no tattoos, no beer drinking, no smoking cigars, cigarettes, nothing like that. And so that's kind of the world I was born into in my early adolescence. And then around the age of 11 or 12, we shifted into, my dad was introduced to the Advanced Training Institute of America, Institute of Basic Life Principles, Bill Gothard. Anybody listening can look this up, but I think a good reference point is the Happy Shiny People. That was that Amazon Prime? Did that came out on?
I think it was, yeah.
And the Duggar family, 17 and counting, 18 and counting, 23 and counting, however many they had and counting, and how everything looked awesome. Like that was the whole premise of the show, is everything from the outside on TLC or whatever channel was, I think it was Learning Channel, but whatever channel was hosting that, everything looked glossy and shiny and happy and pristine. And yet there was this raging, demonic, almost force behind the scenes that has catastrophized their family in so many ways. And still, if I'm going to be honest, while not trying to cast any stones, it seems that a lot of people in that movement, maybe even that very family, try the patriarch of that family and matriarch of that family, try to like put on the veneer. And so that was very prevalent, and I would say that was indicative of the entire movement. Now, that's not to say everybody in the movement was like a Josh Duggar. Like, that's not true at all. But they would do these conferences, and it was very segregated. It was boys on one side of the room and girls. You went to these conferences as well, girls on the other side of the room. Exactly what you saw in that documentary. And if somebody hasn't watched that documentary, if you're not easily triggered by like cultish movements, check out that documentary. It'll help to understand your background and mine. But we came out of that. So it was kind of the whole atheist dating goodbye movement, Josh Harris, but on steroids. You didn't talk to girls. You didn't even think about girls. You certainly didn't talk about how a girl was cute or sexy or anything of that nature. And so that was kind of my teenage years, in your teenage years. And while staying in the independent Baptist movement. And so what somebody has to realize is, okay, you look at me now, 30 years removed from those teenage years, and part of where I am now, I think, part of where you are, and part of where I think a lot of our listeners might find themselves is we were kind of force-fed a formula of rules and morality and law and scorecards and good grades, spiritually, so to speak, whereby it was never actually said to us, because all these movements, the ATIA, the Independent Baptist Movement, all of them, radical right evangelicalism, all of them were, quote, grace-based, grace alone, by faith alone, in Christ alone.
Yeah.
But under law, I mean, I reference a quote often by Dane Ortland about how we're soaked in law, we're law marinated. And I think particularly the movements I grew up in were just extremely law marinated. It was like there was the good boys and there was the bad boys. And there was the good girls and there was the bad boys, bad girls. And what you came to realize over time is everyone was a bad guy and everyone was a bad girl. They were just the religious older brother who was self-righteous and thought they were gaining the Father's approval by keeping the laws, or they were like you and I, the younger rebellious brother who realized they could never earn the Father's approval, and so they broke the rules. And so kind of came to that realization. And then around 17, 18 was introduced to the Puritans for the first time. So now you have like this unholy trinity colliding, coalescing. Not to say the Puritans and the Reformers are unholy by any means. Like, I learned a lot from them. But that whole Reformed world, of which we've talked about, that is very graceless also at times. The world that is now condemning Steve Lawson and condemn Tullian Tchividjian. And I'm not saying these men didn't sin, but as soon as anyone shows any frailty or fracture or any chaos, we cut them off right away. And there's no extension of grace. There's no there's no room really for genuine like realignment or repentance, as Scripture would call it. And at least that's been my experience.
Yeah.
And so you had super conservative independent Baptist movement coupled with homeschool cultish movement coupled with now reform movement, but really the MacArthur extreme right reform movement, which isn't even like no capital in MacArthur, but it isn't even really reformed because it's dispensational reformed. And so anyway, that's kind of what led me into going to Bible college.
Yeah.
Which was an independent Baptist school that, we wore shirt and tie, closed-toed loafers every day.
Yeah.
And study the Bible in a very, and these are things we can talk about later on, but in a very literal, hermeneutical way of unpacking, understanding Scripture. And everything was very, I would say, airtight, especially for an educational institution where you're supposed to be like exploring.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be like getting to the philosophy behind things. It was just like very rote. Like, this is what you believe. This is why you believe it. Don't question. Don't, and that's kind of how a lot of those movements were. And that's,
Before you kind of dive into the Bible college, like, what prompted you? Like, what made you want to go to Bible college of all places? Because you kind of had said that, you were on the rebellious end of things as a teenager. You weren't really buying all this stuff that we were raised in. So what made you even want to do that in the first place?
I have a very iconoclastic surprise personality. I've talked about it before. All those movements I grew up in, including the Reformed movement now, for the most part, rather demonize personality testing, functionality, prototypes, Clifton Strength Finders, Myers-Briggs DISC profile, and the Enneagram, especially the Enneagram.
Yeah.
Those would have all served me well. They also, all those movements kind of demonize psychological neurology, your makeup, how you might be, how that can help you, how psychology can actually help you.
Everything is just a sin issue, basically.
Everything's a sin issue. Everything's a spiritual issue. Like, your heart's not right. So, like, get it right and your brain will work properly.
Yeah.
And so medication was oftentimes, and I'm not saying this is everyone, once again, but oftentimes in that extreme right homeschool group, especially the ATIA, Bill Gothard group of the world, which, by the way, you can look up online if you're listening, and the Bill Gothard group, it's not just the Duggar family, the whole Bill Gothard is drenched in scandal now, but the independent Baptist world and the extreme right reform world, there was, hey, don't question anything, everything is a biblical issue, everything's a spiritual issue, everything's a sin issue, repent of it, turn from it, forsake it, take it captive, and that's just not true. Like, and so what I realized is, I only realized this 2.5 years ago, is that I'm on the neurodivergent spectrum, okay? Which is probably not surprising for people who listen to me talk and who know me well. I don't do well socially where most people would, but about 8% of the population, give or take, is neurodivergent. It just means their brain works not typical. They're not neurotypical. They don't think the way that most of the populace thinks. Okay, and that can be everything from ADHD to schizophrenia to the autism spectrum. Everything kind of falls into that neurodivergence. So I won't go into what my diagnosis is because, quite frankly, that's my business, and I don't think people really care. But it would have helped. It would have helped growing up to know this.
Yeah.
Like once I came upon this, and really good Christian psychologist I was meeting with, really kind guy, used to be a pastor. And once he diagnosed me this and walked through it, it made perfect sense. And like for the first time in my life, I felt like a fish in water instead of a fish out of water, like dealing socially. Like it felt like I understood myself. And if my close friends had known this all along, they would have understood. My coworkers would have understood. My elders at different churches would have understood. They just understood better. Not to make excuse for any selfish sin, manipulation, whatever. But I think maybe some of that at times, if we truly seek to understand each other, and that includes me trying to understand someone else, we can help mitigate some sin in their life, because sin comes oftentimes through impatience when we feel misunderstood or judged or Whatever.
Just out of curiosity, like, is there a particular thing that sort of encapsulates like if you had known this thing better, or if people around you had known this thing, like you said, it would have made everything so much easier. Like, what was that thing?
I mean, there's a few things. There was a few things for me. One is that I just have and this is part of the disorder, if you want to call it that. A lot of times they're not even seeing these things as disorders anymore, but that's for another conversation. But the difference, we can say that, the difference that I have is that my mind works in reverse. Like, so if anyone tells me to do something, even if it's the best solution, my mind will try to find an alt route to that. We'll try to find a different pathway. That's very American, but like that's something that my brain just instinctively does. I heard Tucker Carlson, not that I listen to Tucker Carlson, not picking sides here, folks, but I heard Tucker Carlson. My wife sent me this video by him. It was like a short clip. What are they called? Reels. Yeah, a little reel.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how when someone gives him marching orders, it feels like death and suffocation. And he just cannot, and for me, particularly growing up, I had to know the philosophy behind everything, which we talked about in previous episodes. I had to know why, because if there wasn't a why behind it, if there was no reason behind we were going to do it this way, and that's so much of evangelicalism. There's no why. It's just like, this is what we believe. This is what we do. This is how we act. And so that was part of it. I think another big thing for me that would have really helped is in how I relate to people. Like, I don't read people well. I don't read. Daniel's always like, oh my gosh, like, don't say that. Like, don't react like that. Have a better poker face. Like, because I don't read people well. And that's part of also what I have. I'm not oriented socially. People with the condition that I have and many other conditions in neurodivergence are prone to copycat syndrome. So they'll kind of copy the behaviors of other people they see that are palatable in society, because they're like, hey, they seem like they're getting along well with people, so like, let's try to copy them. But you're always kind of that fish out of water. You never feel like you fit into that social setting. And that's why I think, if I'm honest, big shout out to my friends who do this, but I think when you finally find people who just kind of accept you for all your weirdness and quirkiness and divergence and difference, you feel like you can breathe again. Like, you feel like you can kind of rest. And I never felt like that growing up. My parents were very loving people, but I'm talking about in the movements we were in the homeschool movement, and the independent Baptist, and even in the Reform movement. And then when I went to college, it was, we're in a very meritorious, achievement-oriented society and culture, and college is no different. So, how good are you at sports? How good are you at education? What traveling ministry team are you on? Can you win the preaching competition? And I was in the preaching competition, and I was selected as one of the top 5 in the school. Like, they do that like junior or senior year. I think it was senior year. Yeah. And maybe it was my pride, but I felt like they didn't select me because I had gotten in too much trouble over the course of time, and because they knew I was a Calvinist. The school I went to was not a Calvinist, and I'd gotten really into like the Calvinistic way of thinking. Was subjected in those early Reform years to R.C. Sproul, who was great. He was fantastic. Don Grissom and everything, but he was fantastic. And obviously Piper and MacArthur, and so I just started gobbling up everything they gave us, including what the Puritans and the Reformers, reading Calvin and reading Spurgeon, who was kind of the last of the Puritans, him or Ryle, and reading Bunyan and Newton and Flavel and all those guys. So just kind of soaked myself in that, read it pretty extensively, even outside of like required reading at school, which my school wasn't requiring me to read those guys. It was more like Louis Sperry Schaefer and Charles Ryrie, some of those dispensational guys. So anyway, I learned the most growing up, and then particularly in college, by kind of fighting against the norm, which is what my brain is wired to do anyway. But I feel like it's very productive learning, is when you're in an environment where you have to defend what you believe or why you don't believe what that environment is preaching, teaching. Yeah. But I came out of all of that in 2003 and felt like I was without a home to some degree. Obviously, I distanced myself from the Gothard movement years prior when I went into Bible college, but was still kind of like in this weird world of independent Baptist, but also the right Reformed world. And those really don't mesh together, and they really don't mesh with anybody else. Like they really don't get along with anybody else. And so I became I did what anybody would probably do in that situation. I became a traveling youth speaker, traveling around the United States and Canada and a few different places in the world, doing Discipleship Now weekends and youth rallies and True Love Waits conferences and all this stuff. Yeah.
You did also, though, come from that tradition. Your dad did that, a lot, and you traveled with him a lot. And so I imagine that might have felt actually somewhat at home a little bit.
If I'm honest, looking back on it now, I think it felt good because you never, this is going to sound sad, but once again, I'm not the victim. But when you're doing that lifestyle, you never are in one place long enough to be known well enough to be judged.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, and I didn't see that in the moment, but like you're kind of like the rock star who flies into town for a weekend or for a 3-day conference, and everybody loves you and they adore you and they hang on every word, and you have your 3 or 4 best messages, sermons that you can deliver, and you pack them in. And everybody's crying and holding hands and singing Kumbaya, and making decisions. And I did that for 3 years, and it was cool. It was powerful. It got a little old for a couple of reasons. One, I would go back to the same churches or conferences, and I'd be like, "Where's this kid from last year who we played ball with all week at the summer camp?" And they made a strong profession of faith, and they were like had fallen off the radar. And so what I was seeing was a dearth in follow up and discipleship, and just kind of understanding what discipleship is supposed to be. And I started to get lonely. I started to feel like I need a place to kind of call my own and lay my head. And I was living in Pastoral, Florida at the time. I moved there with my brother Nate for his last year. He was in a even stricter Bible college than I went to, but I went there. He was living off campus, so I went there to live with him, and then he moved away back to Atlanta, and I stayed there in Pensacola, and tried to like figure out who I was, and kind of went in and out of ministry at times, just traveling some, part-time youth pastor for about 3.5 years there, and at the end of, I was a youth pastor in a PCA church for 2.5 years. A PCA church that's not around anymore. Presbyterian Church in America. That's R.C. Sproul, Tim Keller's denomination. I think it's Sproul's. I know it was Tim Keller's, but but conservative, good, solid church. Kind of a church plant, about 100 people, and the youth group really grew, and really started to take off, and the pastor who was there and the couple elders were really happy with it. We went on a couple mission trips. We went from about 4 or 5 youth to about 35 youth in the youth group, which isn't big, but like considering where we came from, a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, but it was a lot of unchurched kids. And at the end of the day, as jaded as it sounds, it's the truth. Unchurched kids don't bring in families who pay the bills of the church. Yeah. So we had a couple of kids from the Presbyterian church across town come in with like wealthier families, I guess, but those kids didn't feel like they fit with these unchurched kids. And so the church decided to release me and let me go. And that's the long and short of it. There was nothing else to it than that.
Yeah.
And they just let me know that was going to be it. So that was like kind of the first wound, so to speak, in the church world.
Well, before that part though, when did you, I don't know if you actually answered like this, like deciding to go to Bible college, if you felt that was sort of a rebellion of some way. And at what point did you feel like I'm going to be in ministry? I'm going to be some sort of pastor, or, people talk about having like a call to that. Like, did you ever feel that? Was this just always, I don't know if it was Keller or who. I mean, I heard it all through Bible college, the quote, like MacArthur would say, if you can see yourself doing anything else, then you should do it. You're not meant for this kind of thing. And so, like, did you have that kind of, this is just all I'm here to do?
I think that's one of the things that a lot of people struggle with. And I don't want to even feel that from you or I.
Yeah.
Is, there's, as simplistic as it is, there's only one God. And there's only one who can comfort our souls, convict our souls, convince our souls. And so many of these pastor preachers, even on a smaller stage like myself, we can set ourselves up as like a godlike figure.
Yeah.
Like, what I say goes, and my opinion is 100% what matters, even if it's not biblical. And that's just kind of bullcrap, if I'm honest with you. Like the whole, like, if you can see yourself doing anything else, maybe it's good advice, but when we say it as if it's like biblical and this is mandated by God, it's kind of ridiculous. And so I think there was a lot of that though growing up, where you're just like, whether it was Driscoll in the mid 2000s, or Chandler a little bit later on, or Keller before that, or Piper before him, whoever it was, you're just like these guys are not divine, and they make mistakes, and they've been proven to make mistakes. And so for me, I went to Bible college because my parents, I was smart enough to realize in all my stupidity that I needed their financial help. And they said, you can choose either Pensacola Christian College, which has also been aptly named Pensacola Concentration Camp. It is terrible, or it was. I'm sure it still is. Bob Jones University, which was like 2 hours from my house. So my parents won't be coming home on the weekends. Or Northland Baptist Bible College. Literally, those were the three options. And they would not help with any other. Even Clearwater Christian College, which was extremely traditional and conservative back in the day. But because we visited and the guys and girls could hold hands on campus, boyfriend, girlfriend, college age, no. There was no help.
Dude, an aside, I remember when I decided to go to Masters and I was looking at their literature that they mail out, and the guys and girls were wearing sunglasses in the pictures.
Sunglasses,
cool looking Oakley sunglasses at the time. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, man, this place is, I'm going to have to guard my soul in this place,
With sunglasses, with some shades, man.
That just gives you a window into how we were raised. But yeah,
I mean that does give you a window. I mean, I remember, like, just for reference point, I think his name was Kurt Busch. You wouldn't know him. He was a baseball player. That's no ragging on Adam. It's just you weren't a baseball fan growing up.
Wouldn't know.
I think his name was Kurt Busch, and he was like a sold out Christian late 80s. Okay, so I'm like 8 or 9 years old. Very, very prominent Christian in Major League Baseball. And yet he promoted, I think, a Busch beer commercial. Mm. And it was kind of like, he's not a real Christian. Like that was the mentality. You see that and you're just like, nope. No. Or like somebody literally in church will be like, can you believe that crap? And you're like, oh my gosh, they're going to hell. It was kind of like that. And that, it sounds like we're joking, but that was a true mentality that existed. Like, a girl would show up to church in jeans, like baggy jeans even, and you're like, oh, backslidden, worldly. Yeah, like
I don't even remember any girls wearing jeans. That would have been scandalous. But yes, it was very much an us, and this is part of a cult. This is how a cult works. It was very much an us versus literally everyone else, not just us versus non-Christians. It was us versus anyone else who wasn't in our walled garden. There was so much of like, well, none of them are real Christians. We are the only real ones.
We're the only real Christians in the world. Yeah.
Anyway, that's
why I chose Bible college. And then the other day, I was golfing with some guy. I don't know. I had met him out on the golf course, and he's like, whenever I meet people and they ask me what I do, and I tell them I'm a pastor, they're always like, interesting. I didn't see that coming,
Yeah.
And this guy was
apologizing immediately.
A lot of times they'll start apologizing for who they are and how they've been behaving on the course, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you think I'm a priest? And but he asked that. This guy was a Christian though. He's like, oh man, like that's awesome. You served the Lord. Like, how did you? And he literally asked, how did God call you into that? And I told him, I've never been a mystical person.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this for somebody else. They couldn't have like a mystical experience. Like maybe they could. For me, it was just like kind of common sense. Like God gave me a gift. God gave me like a passion to like study the Bible and articulate scripture. Kind of pick apart ideas, make people think. One of my closest friends texted me a couple of days ago and said, listening to a podcast, I thought of you because they said on the podcast, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Yeah.
And that's what my friend immediately thought of me. And I was like, that, I completely affirm that. Like the unexamined, like we don't look inside. We don't look at why we're conducting ourselves the way we do, why we're believing what we're believing, and how that shapes everything about our life. And so we need to examine our lives. And there just wasn't a lot of that. But for me, like when I went into ministry, it was honestly like a plan of, I'm going to do this ministry thing until something else comes along.
Yeah.
And until I determine what I want to do with my life when I'm grown up.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure that out.
No,
you know, 45 years old. So
yeah, if you weren't doing this, what would you do? Do you have any ideas?
an astronaut.
Well,
I'm kidding.
yeah, clearly that one's obvious, but let's just rule, if it weren't pastor or astronaut.
I think what would make the most sense is like a professor.
Yeah.
Like I would love to continue education and get my doctorate and actually teach. Like, I mean, I love teaching.
Yeah.
Like it's what I enjoy. Yeah, I mean, that would, do you have an answer to that question? If you weren't a baller podcaster?
I was going to say, I was wondering how you're going to describe what I do, but, man, I feel like I have gone through so many careers because I am just endlessly fascinated with learning new things. And when I was in college, I thought I was going to go the professor route because of that drive I just loved learning new things. And I sat down with one of my favorite professors and I was like, I think this is what I want to do. And he's like, well, there is the whole student element, and I was like, yeah,
you got to deal with people.
I don't really care about the kids. I just want to get paid to study what I want to study. And he's like, yeah, it's probably not the best fit for you. But anyway.
But to go back to so got in the ministry, and I know some of the uber religious will be like, well, that's why you got fired from your first job or were asked to leave or whatever. However you want to, churches are weird about that. Churches don't like to fire anybody. So they'll be like, hey, we really believe the Lord is leading you on, and so, anyway,
it's for you.
Left that church. And when I left that church in 2005, I was like, there was this very popular book at the time, and it was called Love Jesus, Hate Church. I don't know if you ever saw that book. It was 2005.
I think I did see that. Yeah.
And it was basically a guy who had just been burned by the church, hurt by the church. And, my upbringing, seeing what I had seen, by this point in time, a lot of the teenagers we went to church with growing up who were super religious had abandoned the faith, had chosen an atheistic lifestyle, extremely sexually promiscuous lifestyle, everything you can imagine. And so you're seeing that, you're seeing you're, every year that goes by, you start to see more and more the underbelly of church. It's like the lights are getting turned on and you're seeing the roaches kind of run out and you're like, ooh, leaders are falling left and right. And so you're like, man, this is, I don't know if I really want to be a part of this thing. And I would say that was probably the closest I came 2005 to a deconstruction experience where I was like, do I really believe this Christian thing? I was in Pensacola, which is part of the Bible Belt. Once you get, for those who don't know, who aren't from Florida, once you get south of really I-10, Pensacola, Panama City, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, south of I-10 is really not the Bible Belt anymore. The rest of Florida down here is not. It's a melting pot. But up there, that's kind of the bottom edge of the Bible Belt. But you had these ultra Baptist churches, you had Pentecostal churches, and nobody could get along. And it was still that us versus them mentality. And I was kind of feeling wrung out, kind of feeling used, if I'm honest. Like I said, that was around the time also after 3 years of traveling and speaking and doing conferences that I was like, man, there's just not a lot of follow-up. It doesn't seem like people actually care. What is going on here? And it seems like there's a lot of inauthenticity that's going around. And so...
but were you feeling disillusioned with just the church or Christianity in general? I
think the church for sure. And the faith as I had been taught it.
Yeah.
I think. And was wondering at that point, and this is 20 years ago. Now, that was crazy to think about.
I know.
But was wondering how much of this is legitimate.
Yeah.
It's true. Because our churches, like most churches today, I think, and if you're listening to this and you're in a good church that's teaching the word and apologetics and unpacking truth, then great. But I don't think most of them do that. They don't teach the philosophy behind truth, the search for truth and why we believe what we believe and how we can defend it. And so I'm sitting there going, man, my faith felt anemic. All these years spent in the church, 4 years in Bible college, now 3 years in ministry full time. And I'm just doing, so I went and got a secular job working for Abercrombie and Fitch, new kids on the block.
Yeah.
So I went and worked for Abercrombie and Fitch for 10 months, moved up fast. and didn't go to church.
Yeah.
Which is now I look at and I'm like, my spiritual life suffered a lot. My intellectual life suffered a lot, if I'm honest, because the way of the world is anti-intellectual, and that sounds harsh, but the way of that, at least that type of culture, that Abercrombie and Fitch type culture, that pleasuristic, hedonistic culture, is anti-intellectual. Kind of living for the moment, living for today. So, and finally kind of came to the point of being like, I need to, like, repentance for me most of the time, instead of being a soul-stirring experience, which it can be for people, it's been more of a cerebral thing where it's like, this is not right. Like, you're heading down a path that is terrible. Like, you need to, like, turn this thing around. And that's the Spirit of God just convincing me, I believe, that that's what's needed. So that's what happened.
Do you feel like you became a believer as a kid? Or I know you had like a college-ish experience, and I've had something similar, and I've always gone back and forth since then, but I'm just curious, like, how you feel about that looking back.
I don't know. I mean, I think that the best answer, that might freak some people out, but hey, once again, a very unbiblical thing that has been paraded for years is like this, the time and place of your conversion, justification experience. It's nowhere in Scripture that you have to know that. And it is a one moment, a momentary experience. Like, we know that when you pass from death from life, regeneration leads to justification, and you're declared right before God, and you're a member of His family, adopted. But knowing where that happens, like, I know that I am, and I understand now the concepts of grace. My ministry, my youth ministry, traveling around speaking, was called Extreme Grace. I was always a huge component of grace as I understood it. But I think that's been the biggest shift in my theology over the years, is to really espouse, embrace, and let be the beauty of scandalous divine grace. And so now I look back and I go, maybe I was saved as a kid. It feels like every time I came to Jesus, I came to Jesus out of fear. Fear of going to hell, fear that I was going to get left behind in this rapture that, once again, reference back to our eschatology study last term. Don't believe in as separate from the second coming. But anyway, it was always out of fear, or to impress some girl who was there in the audience, or my dad or my mom. Like, these are all the reasons why I came to Jesus, right? But I think when I ultimately came, when I truly came, is when I was convinced, which is just another word for conviction. Like, that's where it comes from, is this idea that my soul is convicted or convinced that this is true. That my sin is real and it needs to be abandoned, that the cross work of Jesus and the resurrection is true and sufficient and atoning. And I trust that for my eternal hope. And it's as simple as that, and as profound as that. And I don't know when that happened. But it probably happened before college, because grace is so powerful that whosoever believes on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ will be saved. Confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart He's raised him from the dead, and you'll be saved. We don't have to make it more complex and convoluted than that. And when we do, we start adding to the gospel. So probably in my early adolescence, I look back and I'm like, was my faith more fervent, more ardent, deeper, stronger? No, I think from 7 or 8, it was pretty strong, pretty robust.
And that's the thing. Even if your faith was there for all the wrong reasons, if you were coming to Jesus, as you said, for all the wrong reasons, that doesn't mean that you weren't still coming to Him. And like how we were raised, all those motivations made all the difference, which is why, a lot of us spent our entire childhoods in terror of not being real Christians. But I don't know that it actually, as you just said, I don't know that it matters what made the initial motivation.
Why or when. Why or when. It's just that is what matters. That you have believed. That you are believing. Like, that's what matters. So, I mean, that kind of gives you my non-call into ministry. That gives you my not knowing when I was converted, justified, and my kind of pathetic reason for going to Bible college. So there you have it, folks. That's Aaron Kern in a nutshell right there.
I'm going to insert the Austin Powers clip right there. It's me in a nutshell.
After working for Abercrombie for 9 or 10 months, I was like, this is not it. I moved to New Orleans after Katrina hit in 2005. I got my own store there in Metairie, and was working there. And it was just a very anti-God, godless lifestyle, like, of everybody around me, and that seeped into my being. I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't going to church, hardly ever. I wasn't having good conversations, wasn't reading things that were enlightening. Got back in by God's grace, truly, providentially, got back into a church, Christian Missionary Alliance Church was next on the radar. So grew up Baptist, Baptist Bible College, Presbyterian Church for 3 years, Christian Missionary Alliance for a year, and I was their interim, and just did not feel this was the fit. I was driving about an hour to work, and after about a year, they offered me a full-time position. They've been looking for a guy. They decided I was the guy. The only reason they hadn't wanted me to be the guy originally because I was single, but during that time I got engaged to Danielle. And so they're like, hey, you can be the guy now. And I just didn't feel like it. So I was like, hey, look, I'll stay and I'll continue to help the kids and teach the kids and mentor the kids. It was about a 100-person youth group there. And I just remember the pastor being like, no, you can pack up your office today if you're not going to take this. And so there was another kind of wound because it was like, like, dang. And so that happened. And so I put out feelers, started to freak out a little bit, like, what am I going to do? And I don't think I was quite engaged yet, but we were moving toward that. And then found a job about a couple weeks later, thankfully, at a Southern Baptist church in Pensacola.
Yeah.
And so took the position there of associate pastor of worship and teaching, and was over everything, though. That was one of those churches where the pastor was older. I was the second member on staff, and he was quite a bit older, and he liked to kind of sit out by his pool and listen to podcasts and listen to sermons and preach on Sunday and meet with the leadership, which is like, whatever, like, teach their own. But I was like the young buck, 25, 26 years old. So I oversaw the young adult ministry that started to thrive, the youth ministry, the missions and outreach ministry, the assimilation and hospitality ministry. And then I would preach every third to every other Sunday and lead the worship band as well. So it was a lot of stuff kind of going on there. Yeah. And the pay was pretty bad. And Daniel and I got married in that church, and began to realize that not only was the pay pretty bad, but Daniel's old peers, like, our worlds were colliding. Like, Daniel came from a very non-Christian kind of background. Her mom's a believer, but not regularly in church, not very theological, but Danielle had a mind for philosophy when we met. So we would stay up late at night, sitting on my porch with my roommates, and we would talk philosophy and stuff. And so I realized her old friends were kind of druggies and drank a lot, and our worlds, me and Danielle's worlds, were colliding. And so I'm like, we got to get out of Pensacola. And that's when we found a job down here in Dunedin at another Southern Baptist church. And around that time, I was ordained right before I left Pensacola, ordained Southern Baptist. Moved down to North Dunedin and had a good time there. Loved the pastor there. But once again, it was kind of worlds colliding. I mean, here I am. I'm always like progressive in my ideologies and my pursuit of like learning, and it was a very traditional Southern Baptist church, and there was some clashes and stuff. But in 2011, they sent me out to plant a church, and it wasn't like the most peaceful exit, but it wasn't toxic either.
And at this point, you were pretty firmly in like fairly traditional PCA Reformed theological mindset.
Gospel Coalition, 9 Marks, like kind of, in that camp of, but I would say even maybe a little further right than that. Kind of in the, not quite in the Paul Washer, John MacArthur realm, but like, around the time I planted. And so we drew a lot of those kind of people. And then as I started the evolution of understanding grace as I think it's meant to be understood, it offended a lot of those people, if I'm honest. And earned me monikers that we've already talked about, antinomian and liberal theologian or whatever.
What started that? What started you into this different understanding of grace?
I think there was there are several minor catalysts. Seeing church leaders fall in profound ways, seeing the rampant deconstruction everywhere, seeing apologists like Ravi Zacharias get outed for all this horrific activity. There was all kinds of catalysts that I was finding, things not adding up to me intellectually, even that were kind of widely espoused by Christians on a secondary level. I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. That were not biblical. But I think honestly, one of the biggest was the two biggest are probably church hurt. Like, for the first time, really being a lead pastor in 2010, 2011, and the way, once again, not playing the victim card, I did so much crap on my own. Like, I hurt so many people's feelings, like, and it doesn't make it right. Like, I didn't mean to sometimes I didn't mean to, but feeling that hurt myself and seeing how people react and how Christians would bite. And then also Evie's surgery that went awry. So we planted in 2011. The church grew slowly for 3 years. Then it exploded over a course of 3 years and went from 250 people to probably 750, 800 people. And 3 services. And just before we went to 3 services, Evie, my little girl, is born, my second child. And she has, most friends know, most people who go to Redemption know, but she has a congenital heart defect. One of her valves is missing. She has holes in multiple areas of her heart. And so she's not going for surgery, and I have to be careful what I say because there was a big lawsuit around this. But anyway, she went into surgery at a certain hospital, and there was this fraudulent activity and all kinds of stuff went bad. And when her sinus rhythm of her heart was cut, so her heart was beating on its own before the surgery. After the surgery, the repair was okay. It's not great. And we just got bad news on that not too long ago. That's leaking more than it should be. And that's really heavy. Like, here's the thing, man. I was talking to my hairdresser the other day. Like, I say hairdresser. She cuts my hair.
I know.
And she used to go to my former church, and she's going to another church now, and she's a great girl. But she has adopted a little girl. Beautiful little girl. And but the little girl is 17, 18 months and is going through sleep regression. And I said to her, Katie, no one should judge a parent for anything they do when their child is going through sleep regression. I remember those days. I remember, and it's easy to forget those, like all like sleep deprivation, stress and anxiety, and depression, all these things that we deal with. And then you couple all that in the ministry pressures, which were self-inflicted. Like, I wanted my church to be the perfect church. I wanted to be the perfect church. And so, but then you couple all that and you kind of lay it on with, this surgery, the waking up for 6 months, just we had to wait till she was 6 months old for the surgery. And then waking, like the waking up in the middle of the night for 6 months, wondering if she was still breathing. I mean, they literally told us when we went home, if she starts turning blue, bring her back to the hospital, and so for 6 months, we're watching her like a hawk, and like I'm feeding her every night. And you're growing so attached to this little girl, your baby girl, and yet there's like this colossal issue going on. And so then you take her in, you entrust these people that sit there and take care of her, and they basically, for all intents and purposes, butcher her, and they don't do a good job. And then the news breaks. It doesn't just break for us, it breaks in the papers. Like, it's a huge deal. Yeah. And I was irate. And the very night that I found out about it, in 2018 now, after 7 years of being a pastor planter, church growing, crazy, but stressed out. But the night I found out, I lashed out. I lashed out at employees, staff members, super impatient, angry, and apologize for that. But I think those are some of the things you can never like take back. I also saw during that time how everyone was expecting me to like keep it together. So I had this pressure to like keep it together, during Evie's surgery, like in her recovery, and how people were like, man, you're such an inspiration, like this is before I got angry. But they're like, you're such an inspiration, all this. And I'm like, I'm kind of just a con artist. Like, my faith isn't like super strong. I'm like wondering why the God who's supposed to be good could, like, because it wasn't just Evie. I'm walking around the CVICU with my guitar, because we were in the CVICU for 15 days because waiting for her heart to recover. They're like, it could come back. And every day you have hope, and it just keeps dwindling. And so when she's sleeping, I would walk around the CVICU and play guitar for other families who had been there for months. Babies born with their heart backward, babies looking for heart transplants, all kinds of stuff. And you're going, like, hold on a second. There are sexual predators roaming this world free and clear and in good health. There are millions of women a year aborting healthy babies. And I'm walking around this ward with a bunch of dying children. And I'm just supposed to like cross my fingers and believe you've got everything under control. And that you're just good. And that you're kind. And that you're gracious and all this. So I started kind of going through a crisis in that moment. Of like trying to understand the nature of prayer, the nature of the miraculous. Does that still exist to this day? And I know you want to talk about that at some point. And our home group talked about that, and some minds melted, I think. But I started like wrestling through the goodness of God and the kindness of God and what all that looks like and the grace of God. And it was really good. It was really beneficial for me. But those were some dark moments and some deep thoughts. And you were one of the only people, quite honestly, during that time that could handle it, because you were going through your own crisis, which we'll get to. So we started podcasting, and that's when we originated the conversations between a Christian, our pastor, and a skeptic. Was when I was going through that, questioning so much, and yet you were basically denying most things that we had grown up believing.
Yeah.
But that was early 2018.
Yeah.
2018 that we would have been podcasting, and by the end of that year, I kind of broke, kind of snapped. And ultimately, long story short, over the next 4 years, a series of mistakes and sins that I made, nothing that's like crazy scandalous or like that would get you kicked out of most churches, I don't believe, but just impatience, anger issues, favoritism, things that, shouldn't be tolerated, but, you move in that direction, and there's moments and seasons of health, like really robust and strong health, and then moments and seasons of frustration and impatience. And I'll be honest, and mistakes and sins I've committed, but also mistakes and sins other people committed too. The church is a very selfish place, an extremely selfish place, and we want it our way. We want it to be BK, like our way, only our way, and I want it to be my way. And so, anyway, almost 2 years ago now, I went on sabbatical, and then I ended up stepping away from that church, at the time, believing it was right, now realizing it was absolutely the right thing to do, the healthy thing to do. And once again, there wasn't like this premonition or mystical experience of like starting a new church. It was just a lot of people who felt wounded from past church experiences, displaced. They didn't have any place to go. They were friends. They were close, or they loved my teaching, whatever it was. And they were like, hey, would you teach us? Would you just do a Bible study for us? And we did.
Yep.
And, here we are a year and a half later. And grace is strong and deep and rich and freeing. And the people, I believe, who are coming to redemption are, we're struggling. Like we're struggling with life. We're struggling with hurts. We're struggling with setbacks and frustrations, whatever it is. But at the same time, I think we're living free. In Christ, we're appreciative, truly appreciative of grace, worshipful for His grace, and that would be true of my life. Like I would say that I've never been in a more healthy, vibrant, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual setting, kind of a holistic health than I have experienced right now, and in a church like this. I've been in. I don't know, 6 or 7 churches now over the course of my life and ministry. And it's a very healthy experience. It's a very simplified model, but I think that's good. I think we need to get back to what the early church, first century church was doing. Worship, teaching, the ordinances or sacraments, fellowship, communion together, serving. It's pretty simple. Yeah. And we overcomplicate things in the church a lot of times. And, we want to do more than we really have the bandwidth or capacity to do. And so I'm learning to say no. I used to work 70-hour work weeks. I told somebody recently, it feels like I'm semi-retired because I work 40 hours a week now. And that just feels weird. It feels weird to put in a 6, 7, 8-hour day, maybe a 10-hour day here, a 6-hour day there, and put in 40 hours and be done. Like it feels weird after all those years but I'm like, all those years outside of like reaching people and helping people, hopefully. Building a bigger church and a grander platform, what does it get you? Yeah. You're never content. You always just want more. And I think that's one of the things that was damaging about the, I'm not going to blame Acts 29 for it, but the Acts 29 movement, a lot of the conversation at conferences was around church growth and also like racial reconciliation. And if you don't have this many minorities in your church, you're not healthy. And if you aren't growing like this, you're not healthy. If you're not bringing this funding, you're not healthy. And if you're not this size, you really can't train anybody else because you're not successful. And so you need to be that size. And that was subliminal messaging a lot of times, but it was there. And so there are many things over the years that I've grown out of, but I don't know if I would have ever obviously grown out of them if I had never gone through them. Yeah.
I think what makes our church feel that way is because it does feel somewhat like a church of, I was going to say church of outcasts, but that makes it sound like I'm being critical. And I don't mean it that way, but just people who don't really quite fit in anywhere else.
At least not in the modern evangelical landscape.
Yeah. Not in a traditional...
They're tired, and no offense to these churches, they're helping people and reaching people, and we've talked about this, but like they're tired of like the frothy Christianity. They're tired of the like, super rigid Christianity. They're tired of the guilt-laden, law-marinated Christianity. Like they're just tired of that.
Yeah.
It's like everywhere you turn, you're getting some form of this Christianity that's not free. It's not free. It's not truly joyous. It's not relief for the soul. Like I literally saw a guy the other day that I hadn't seen in years, and he used to come to my old church, and I don't know where he goes now, but I saw him passing. He's like, "Whoa, what's up, man?" Came over and talked to me, and was like super friendly. And he's like, "How are things going?" And legitimately, I said to him, "We're in a season of peace and calm." He's like, "Whoa, those are great words." And I'm like, "Yeah, this is the first time in my freaking ministry of 20 years that I could say it's a season of peace and calm."
Yeah.
And shouldn't that not be what we're like striving for? Is we're on the front lines, like we're fighting this battle, so to speak, not against flesh and blood. Like we're surrounded by a culture that's idolatrous and anti-God. We're drenched in our own souls with law marination and self-righteousness and calamity and wickedness at times. And yet, like we live in such an anxiety, guilt-laden, stressful society that just wants to add to that. And it's all about keeping up with the Joneses. It's all about, and the same is true in the church. It's all about, what have you done lately? And it's all about envy and comparison. And so just kind of, maybe we'll do another episode on mental health and like what, by God's grace, I've been able to do. And what insight I've been able to follow to like get to a place of peace and calm.
Yeah.
But it really is a good season.
I think one of the things about redemption is that, you mentioned previously these different experiences, and this thing was scandalous and Bill Gothard was drenched in scandal. And I think the truth is that everyone is drenched in scandal. Everything is drenched in scandal. We just don't see it all. And so when you're with a group of people who are kind of coming in knowing that, where it's like, no one is trying to hide something. We're not doing that game.
We're all jacked up. I mean, I say all the time.
Same level.
2 or 3 times a year, I'll say, and you know it, you've heard it, but if our sins should be plastered up here on the big screen this morning on the projector, if your sins, thought, word, and deed this week, just this week, you go running out here, you never show your face to you. As long as we're aware of that, if we're cognizant of that that's all of us here, that we are all corrupt. And if we can, here's the thing, we scandalize only certain sins.
Yeah.
Right. But if we actually saw sin the way that we begin to see sin the way that God sees sin, then you're right. We're all scandalized. Like we all are. We are all in trouble. We're all envious or gluttonous or greedy or malicious or hateful or bitter. And we're all desperately in need of grace moment by moment by moment. And when you can kind of all come to that realization, that it's really a place of humility where you just go, man, I'm really broken. I'm really damaged. I'm really wounded. I'm really jacked up. I have done my own set of wounding to others. And I am crawling in here in need of grace. And God is just radically, richly pouring out grace upon grace upon grace. Then you can be grateful for that. And you can kind of walk in that freedom. Like it really is freedom. It's like your head breaks the surface. You're not suffocating anymore underneath the weight of all this religiosity. It's free. And so that's been, the whole Russell Brand thing has been very enriching lately. Yeah. He seems like somebody who's not captivated by religiosity, even though he is religious. But he seems like somebody who's been awakened, and he's joyful, exuberant, vibrant, happy. And I think that a lot of that's called for. So anyway, that's kind of my story. I did not live in it for a long time. I've got a ton to learn still. I'm sure I'm going to misappropriate grace in some way, shape, or form moving forward. I'm going to fall back into unhealthy patterns at some point in time. I'm going to sin. I'm going to let people down. I'm just super grateful for gracious people who realize they're sinners and they're broken and are compassionate, and they work with them.
I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode, man. I think it's encouraging to see that shift, and I'm sure there'll be more theological shifts, but freeing is the right word. Peace is the right word, because there is this, we talked before last season with Pilgrim's Progress, letting go of this burden to need to impress people, to make God happy with you. And that really is almost unbelievable way to live, especially if you've grown up this way. And it's great to be in a church where that's the standard. That's what we're coming in with.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
That's cool.
So-
Hey, man, we get to hear the Rev's story next episode, so I'm looking forward to it. That sounds liberating.
I think there's gonna be more scandal in mine, but we'll deal with it.
Well, hey, next time.